I think it's fair to say that it's been a very, well, once again, traumatic and busy week for the Sussexes. This was supposed to be, as hey, their big year, wasn't it? Writing in the sand at the start of the year 2025, but seemingly the wheels have well and truly come off their plan. Or have they? According to Meghan Markle, she's never been happier, more freer, and according to the sources that work with her, she is completely oblivious to the bombshells that are going off around her, literally on a daily basis. As one ex-staff member told me, that's partly due to the fact that Meghan is literally living in her own world. She slipped up, didn't she, when she sat down with Jamie Kern-Lima and basically said they'd got a nanny. Well, that's not technically true. There's more than one nanny. Meghan has a very nice life, and that's all funded by, well, their popularity. But as we've seen the money slide away with the deals of Spotify and simply the lackluster affair now of how people view them, Harry's credentials are at an all-time low, and that's not easy to deal with when you've always had the world liking you. And I think this week's big slapback from Centre Barley has knocked him for six. And as I pointed out before, Meghan Markle, you would have imagined, thought, I need to try and protect my fox, my handsome prince. After all, he famously said, didn't he? Or she said, should I say, that man loves me so much. She didn't exactly say it back though. And this is where the problems are starting to filter through. As ever, let me explain. Morning, lovely to see you, chums. Thank you so much for joining me today in the very heart of London. Nice to have your company, and welcome one and all brand new subscribers. Welcome also to a brand new edition of By Royal Appointment. Yes, I know, back again with another. Isn't this a nice area? This is the corner, by the way, of Oxford Circus. The Palladium's just behind me here. And don't worry, I've got somebody out in front of me. So yes, very well looked after. You know what I'm saying? You have to make sure that you're looking after yourself. I told you before, there's those stickers now up and down the Oxford Street about look out for the phone snatchers. It's ridiculous, isn't it? How about just putting some police on the beat? Maybe that would solve the problem. You get the picture. Now let's move forward, of course, with By Your Royal Appointment, because, as I said, a very big week for Meghan and Harry, for all the wrong reasons. It's interesting because literally every time she wants to come back and rephrase, rebrand, redo herself, whether that be with the wine now with less alcohol, or indeed just basically the way that she's trying to sell herself, dangling off the edge of a bridge or whatever in sandals, Harry just seemingly snatches the headlines back. But they're never good, positive headlines. And the problem that you've got now for Harry is there is a prince with no power, no job, no sort of direction, because the charity thing was what everybody hung it on. Everybody thought that this was a man that was going to do wonders in the charitable world, and in many respects he has. The bigger issue that you have now, though, is that this will reverberate around the world, and it's a bit similar to what happened, say, with the Mayor of London and Donald Trump. Once Donald Trump has said he's a nasty man and useless at the job, you can't pull that back. These people have a big power. Now, Centre Barley, at the time of recording this, are looking into further ideas about whether they should push harder with Prince Harry in the way that this particular situation evolved. Of course, Harry and Meghan would consider going legal, but how many times do you need to go down that particular route? Now, Meghan Markle herself has got major problems in her branding, as I pointed out to you. The wine now seems to be the thing. The jam is taking a bit of a back burner simply because, of course, it's too expensive to produce, make with that expensive lid box. They've even realised that now. But even their new branding hasn't exactly evolved and been able to sell things out to the wider public. And part and parcel of this is really that it's now brand awareness. People know what she's about, and more importantly, she had one shot to get it right. Now, guess what? Her latest team are now basically saying, you don't want to go down the route again of the Gwyneth Paltrow video. Do you remember that? Because that absolutely 100% alienated the media. Basically, we tricked you, we're laughing at you, and the media fell for it. The media have more power. But again, Meghan is very reticent to sit down with literally anybody, whether that be one of the tabloid magazines that absolutely gushes about her, the Us Weekly or People magazine, because she wants it in a bigger, more exclusive place. She wouldn't mind, for instance, being in the Harrods magazine, the Fortnum magazine, as long as they're prepared to take her product. So far, the reticence on both sides, again, I have to say allegedly, for them to embrace the product that she's wanting to offer is not proving very, easy for her to digest. This new team are on something of a lifeline as well. You see, what happens when you get this brand new team is they come up with all these marvellous ideas, but as a source told me, Meghan realises that the only idea that has worked has been her own, and that is this, the twerking video. Yes, that got a lot of attention, but it didn't shift the wine or the pots of jam. But that was eagerly pushed by this new team. Basically, they're saying, we got success. But as I told you, what happens in marketing is they will do anything to put you in the paper. They don't care, as long as they're cashing the check. Does it actually result in sales? Now, the other situation is this, that Prince Harry's completely out of the loop in what's going on with, as ever, Netflix, etc. He's lost all interest in that side of the business, if you want to call it that. Ever since his show Polo flopped, which he couldn't believe, he doesn't understand what direction or which way to go. Because in his mind, that was an exciting show, people would have automatically wanted to watch it. But let's not forget, Harry could not be bothered to promote it. That's how smug and self-centered some people might suggest they are. Right now, though, Meghan Markle and her new team once again have something of a new direction, a new plan. But how many times can you relaunch? And more importantly, why give up something like this that could have been very useful to keep you in the public eye? And perhaps if you'd thought it through, well, you could have in fact got more people to perhaps buy your latest brand. But as ever, Meghan did it her way. But what was it all about? Let me explain. As Meghan and Harry's world continues to sort of crumble, well, bit by bit to dust, apparently, according to an excellent source, Netflix were absolutely stunned by Meghan's next decision. You see, this was supposedly to be able to show Meghan off to be something of a business brain, an entrepreneur, somebody who knew what she was doing and basically was going to teach us, the rest of the world, how to put a very successful business together. But of course, we'd already seen elements of that in the previous incarnation. We're talking, of course, about her association with a podcasting company, Lemonada. Now, you've got to look at it from the aspect of Netflix, right? They'd already struggled just to get this series out of her, and they were looking to think, well, what can we do to co-promote it? They were a little bit stunned when Meghan came up with the idea of female founders, because while it was sort of a good idea, it wasn't necessarily in line with the way that the cooking show was going. You can understand it, right? So again, once you look at the bigger picture, she decided to go down this route without much consultation. And without much consultation, what she also decided to do was stop it. Oh yes, nobody really knew that the show was coming to an end. The way it was going to be sold or perceived was the fact that, people were going to be able to tune into another series. Now, while the ratings were absolutely dire and, there was nobody really interested, I would have to say, in defence, that that's simply because, once again, she didn't really do that much to promote it. Yes, there was a big sign up in Times Square and things like that, but that's not really promotion, isn't it? And, where were the little chats on social media? Where were the bits that were going to entice you in to see who you were going to learn? How about the sneak peeks? Everything came too late. And this is really the problem in the execution of Meghan and Harry. The guy that dumped them from Spotify basically said, I'm thinking they're not truly audio talents. Cruel, but absolutely spot on in many respects. As I've told you many times before, they thought they were getting Harry and Meghan, and that was really part of their deal. Nonetheless, they ploughed ahead with Meghan because they figured, well, she might be able to pull in some kind of audience. But they were wrong, clearly. Now, again, this is where this gets really interesting, because as they're now looking for new revenue streams, one of the ideas, and this is what popped up a couple of months back, Harry, if you remember, zipped up into China, suddenly addressing an audience, and this was going to be reminding people that Harry was very good on the world stage giving speeches. We've seen this time and time again, particularly in Invictus. But of course, they're very well rehearsed and pleasant speeches, but not exactly groundbreaking. There's a problem with Harry, you see, because you can't really get political, you can't really throw your weight behind anything, because people don't want to hear it. They want to buy into the laughable, fun Prince Harry, and he seemingly doesn't want to be that character anymore. But the China idea really was to remind, the rest of the world, and more importantly, very lucrative people, that Harry was available for public speaking for a fee. Now, this can be very lucrative indeed. For instance, British Prime Ministers can earn, anything from 10 to 50 to 100,000, depending on their stature and their background. Getting a former royal would be something of a coup, whichever way you look at it. Now, the problem for this is that it's sort of come to a bit of a sticky wicket, and as ever, I have to say, allegedly. And this all comes down to the fact that the idea that Harry was going to be talking about was really about, successful sort of business stuff, charitable events, how to put them together, what makes them a success, what you have to do to make them a success. This truly fell apart with the Centre Barley thing. Now, up until this week, Prince Harry truly believed 100% that he was not going to have a problem with Centre Barley. There was not going to be an issue. It would be going in his favour. And many sources tell me behind the scenes that Harry thought he would be getting a hero's welcome back and possibly picking up the pieces and running with this project himself. That's why you heard about the stories of him having late night phone calls, bit of a breakdown. He couldn't quite believe that he'd been snatched out of his hands. You see, an ex-royal is not used to being told what to do by the public. This is now what's finding out, really, for Prince Andrew, the former royal known as the Duke of York. He is literally persona non grata. People do not want to invite him. His palace at the pitch really should be a blueprint for Harry as to what you can have and what you lose. So the idea, as I said, was that Harry was going to be available, if you like, on the world stage. Suddenly, if you had enough money, you could get the son of the King of England, the Commonwealth, to come and speak at your event with the right money. And the other form of it was that Meghan was going to make them billionaires through all of her entrepreneurial skills that have never been vetted or thought through previously. But according to Meghan, she knew what she was doing, and consequently it wasn't her fault that she couldn't find a CEO with American Riviera Orchard, or indeed all the setbacks that, has happened. Now, as I told you before, one of the things that Netflix are kind of keen on with Meghan is to detail her journey to becoming a businesswoman. But the problem that they have with this is that you have to have some success at the end of the rainbow. You can't just start the story of, well, I signed up American Riviera, that was a mistake. And she's sort of admitted that on the podcast. You have to have something a little bit juicier. But you see, Meghan's story isn't really conclusive enough to finish with the big finale of, and now it turns over X a year. Netflix are hanging in for that, as well as the other thing. And we all know what that is. But as for Prince Harry, as he looks down new ventures to see what revenue streams he can come up with, that was part and parcel of the reason why this big get-together by sending over his head of communications over to London to see about whether, could we swap diaries so we're not clashing? I don't want to take any of your glory, you don't want to take any of mine. As you can imagine, as I told you at the time, it's very difficult for the royals to consider what glory would they now be snatching away from the one-time royal Prince Harry. But then, of course, there's always this. What's interesting with this new group of people that Meghan Markle's acquired, the new marketing people, Meredith Bain, etc. As I said, they've got an unenviable job, in my opinion, chums, because really, and I've been there many times, if you've had, say, a pop star that's had a hit a few years back, to kickstart that back again, literally is very, very hard indeed. Even if you've got an excellent song, people have met you, people have seen you, and they've formed an opinion. I remember working with one particular pop star, and literally everything was going really well until we appeared on Breakfast TV. And the host of Breakfast TV pointed out that this particular lady, who had a fabulous voice and a great single, well, she was kind of on the wrong side of 30. And so this host, can you imagine this, said, "Oh, you're sort of like the singing housewife." Now, we're selling records to the youth, right? So consequently, this record stalled at 42. And I often use that as an analogy when I look at somebody like Meghan Markle. Who is your market and who are you trying to sell to? Now, one of the things that Meghan refuses to do and refuses to deal with, if you like, is the fact that she can't deal with a very fragile ego. And that really is very, paper thin, tracing paper thin. She can't stand the fact that she will be criticised or indeed highlighted. And as we've seen, anybody, including family, friends, associates that get in their way, well, they are wiped out because, well, they don't agree with the mantra. You see, basically the team believe that Meghan moving forward could do one or two things. And this is never going to happen in my opinion. But they believe, for instance, that Meghan should open the comments of her Instagram page so that she can see the good, the bad and the ugly. And it's something that she needs to get used to as an entrepreneur. You see, all of those people, whether you're a makeup guru or not, would have in fact said to Meghan at some point, this was the most difficult bit. But Meghan right now is shielded from anything that resembles anything like criticism. So is Harry. But of course, he's on a bigger stage where literally his faults are now being played out in the tabloid newspaper. Meghan truly believes, for instance, that she's receiving a lot of love and warmth and wealth from the likes of the jams and the honeys and all of that sort of stuff. And the videos that she personally curates, comes up with alongside other people, and basically thinks this is exactly what the audience want. Now, recently it was pointed out that Meghan has no desire to come back to the United Kingdom. But you see, Netflix see this differently, because looking at the demographic of who truly watched the Meghan and Harry documentary, over here it was very successful. And the bosses of Netflix that really look at money and all that sort of stuff believe that what they need to do is reconnect with the British audience. And why has Meghan wiped off the opportunity to sell teas, jams, wines, etc. to such a large part? Now, the idea, of course, is she's mocked it a little bit by afternoon tea and jam and scones. She's played into it in a cosplay, but they wanted to do more. And as I pointed out, you see, it's now tricky because Meghan and Harry have boxed themselves into a corner where they truly can't move away. Harry's gone on international television saying he doesn't see a day where he could bring his wife and children back because it's not safe. He doesn't feel safe. And he couldn't bring his wife without feeling safe, and that is, he wanted the security. Seconds later, he's pictured, of course, for the world to see, randomly knocking on doors, just with one person behind him. Yes, I get it, there's still security, but nonetheless, a bit of a remiss, isn't it, when you consider you're saying London or England is simply not safe. Safe enough, though, for him to come back for Wellchild, because, again, that ticks a big box, and it's something that apparently he's very passionate about. Again, though, most of the British media are not going to be welcomed into that event. So he's also limiting himself, even with the charitable stuff. And you see how this is now never really going to work out for both Harry and Meghan. You have to be open with the public, and you have to basically say, this is who I am, this is what I am, and this is what I'm doing. Now, the other issue that they've really got is simply the branding, the marketing, the lack of funds, no investors coming forward, nobody seemingly wants to get involved with what should be already a very successful brand. And of course, now what you've got to think about is, well, what is the market going to be? Who on earth is now going to buy into this? Who would want to invest? Now, Kylie Minogue, as I said, is the blueprint for Meghan Markle's wine. She believes if Kylie can do it, she can do it too. After all, they're not too dissimilar in age brackets. Meghan's 44 and Kylie's 57 or 58 coming up now. And she believes, of course, that she has a huge following, particularly with the gay community. Oh yes, Meghan's citing herself now as something of a gay icon. You see, the people that are working for Meghan behind the scenes basically believe that part of the problem why the media don't really take to Meghan is that she's a force of nature, a very powerful woman. Think the likes of Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, Barbara Stanwyck, Mae West, all of these gay icons that Meghan can lean into. But the problem is she's not leaning into it because, you see, we don't know her. Every time Meghan sits down in front of a camera, whether it be with the podcaster Jamie, or she does an interview with Variety, we get a brand new version of Meghan, one we simply don't recognise. Now, as I say, what's interesting with Netflix right now is they're basically deciding what avenue they're going to go down with Meghan. And the reason why they're clinging on is they have a substantial investment in it so far. The TV show they can't get away from. I mean, they could not show it, but why bother? They've spent a lot of money on it, and somebody will probably watch it. But what's interesting also is Netflix have been unable to sell the first series, the first batch of shows, to any other broadcaster, and they have tried. But you see, the public know, and also broadcasters know. I mean, they'll take it, but they're certainly not going to pay the money, as ever allegedly, that Netflix would like, even just to recover some of the costs. So you see, if you can't get it shown on a satellite channel over here, what chance do you have of recuperation? You see how this works? In that Netflix video with Meghan and Harry, remember the scene that was, well, very strange in a sense when you think about it. And it was created, as I pointed out at the time, for dramatic effect. And it was the scene, of course, where, you know, Meghan's sitting there, sans makeup allegedly, and basically Harry points out a message on his phone from his brother. She says, well, he's your brother, and storms out. I mean, really bad acting on all sides. And as I said, at that point, there was no contact via text or anything individually. And as I've also pointed out, what's fascinating is if it really did exist, then the bottom line was that they should have said, well, here it is, we can prove it. But they didn't, because it didn't, right? It was just created for television. But again, making out to be, you know, a terrible brother, when in effect, all William had really done was ask his brother to take a step back and refocus. Now, of course, we know that William has zero time for Meghan Markle, and who can blame him, you know? I mean, she's been incredibly difficult from the off, and he spotted it exactly like the late Duke of Edinburgh did, famously saying, of course, one steps out with actresses, one doesn't marry them. Now that might seem a little bit harsh, and when you think about it, Prince Harry no doubt fell deeply in love with this cable TV, you know, actress, because she played him very well. We all know that from the off. I mean, it's one of the oldest chestnuts in the book. And I find it fascinating, the fact that really Harry, for all of his worldly wiseness of being around the world, was so protected that he couldn't see through it. Equally, I've been told from excellent sources that even former Flames basically said, you know, slow down, you know, recognising, of course, the diva that they could see in front of them. But Harry was clearly mega besotted, and that's all he cared about. Now, here's where this gets really interesting, because you see, as I've pointed out before, William has openly stated that, you know, Meghan Markle was going to be difficult from the off. And you see, she tried to interest William in her plans to revitalise the monarchy, because she saw him, and rightly so, as the future of this great institution. And she figured that if she could convince him, then he could convince the Queen. Told you before her ideas about more inclusivity on, you know, the Christmas Day broadcast, maybe individual messages, a total revamp of the royal family website, no doubt including more Meghan, and just for extra choice, more Meghan too. You get the picture. But of course, William likes certain bits of tradition, doesn't like everything, we know that, but wanted to keep things as they were, particularly during the lifetime of his grandmother, who he absolutely adored, as you can imagine. And they got on incredibly well. This was part of the problem that Meghan really seethed behind closed doors about, because it was one bond that she couldn't break into, because while Harry was seen as great fun, and he was, by the Queen, you know, she did find him quite amusing. He occasionally prank called her, things like that, but he was always treated a little less, you know, shall we say, seriously than his brother. And this is what really nibbed it. Of course, Meghan, being very acute to this sort of stuff, saw right through this, you know, difficult thing that she thought I could get in with, right? Now, as we know, as I say, William pointed out many, many flaws. And bottom line is now, when you think about it, these are all really coming true. You see, Harry was pointed out too, of course, by his elder brother, William, that actually, you know, she may push ahead with these things independently. And right until the very off, when they decided to flex off and go into another world, William pointed out that it isn't a world that you know, and consequently, you know, it may not play out the way that you think. They had got on really almost until the very final moment, because obviously he had truly no idea what was coming with the Netflix stuff. Nobody did inside the monarchy. You know, they had not seen it coming, despite what people were saying. And also what you have to remember with William is he could see that his younger brother was making a huge mistake. If only he decided to let Meghan maybe go and spread her wings and reconnect with her life out there, perhaps, of course, things might be a little bit easier. But no, Harry was convinced that this was going to be the freedom life that he wanted. And apparently, according to this source, the reason behind this was that in Harry's mind, and he's detailed this before, he believed that this would have been the choice of life that his late mother, Diana, the Princess of Wales, would have taken had she lived. Now, as we know, William's a nice guy and basically had gone along with a lot of this fantastical sort of thing that Harry had really sort of built up in his mind, all thanks to endless therapy sessions and stuff like that. But he couldn't beat it because on the other side of the coin, you've got the new wife now basically saying this can be a reality. In fact, she uttered those words during the Oprah Winfrey interview. Remember that? You see, she wouldn't let go simply because she knew that this was her opt-out, her chance to keep the title, keep the children, and of course keep the fame, the thing that she really loved. While she talks about Harry being a fox and a handsome prince, remember, as I've pointed out to you before, it's Harry that's had to write those letters to be read out in public. It's always Harry that has to state how much he loves and adores his wife. The only thing that she could muster was, that's why I married him, right? He's smart. I mean, right. It's hardly a glowing endorsement, is it? But this, as we know, is Meghan's way of keeping control. And many people now can see through this. As their world literally teeters on the brink of collapse, what's going to be interesting is how Meghan now reinvents herself. But she's not clever. I mean, Harry seems to think that she's this bright bulb. But then she went and did this. Let me explain. One of the mysteries in all of the Meghan Markle saga really so far is the fact that when you think about it, things should have been radically different for her. There she was given a wonderful opportunity by none other than one of the biggest agencies in the world, William Morris Endeavour. And they've been very suspiciously quiet. Now, of course, a lot of people say, oh, well, Meghan's a sort of entity to herself. She knows exactly what she's doing. And many people, including the former royal known as Prince Harry, would have thought that because, she even decided to title her flop podcast Female Founders. But of course, all she really achieved by that was letting the world know some medical conditions that we didn't know. Nobody actually remembers the conversations because, well, quite frankly, it wasn't really about the individual, was it? If you'd have noticed and thought, well, how did that person become a success? What made them a founder and became an international icon or whatever? No, you never really found that out. And that's part and parcel now of the way that Meghan operates. But the bigger picture, which really baffled many people, including her agency, was the simple fact that Meghan seemingly couldn't get to grips with how she could make money the celebrity way. You see, many people, as you know, were very, very, baffled by the fact that suddenly she decided to offload suddenly pictures of her children. And, they were all masked up or whatever, Ayla Michael Jackson. But of course, it created something of a buzz. This is the pre-twerking video, right? But the simple ways that she could have made money, she literally didn't get a grip of, according to a very good source. And as ever, I have to say allegedly on this, but it's the most obvious things. You see, when you're launching a brand, you really go all out there, popping up on cookery shows and slots and stuff like that, because you want people to know that you're there, this is the brand, this is what I'm doing. Very similar, as I mentioned before, with the likes of somebody like Dolly Parton, who had a frozen food range, stuff like that. She popped up and did things because she wanted the world to know. You might have popped up on the Today Show or something. But no, apparently she didn't think it was necessary. And on top of all of that, the other things where she could have made a lot of money, she simply gave away for free on her Instagram page. And the rationale with the previous team that she had was the fact that, no, if we give it, we'll get absolute saturation. But because the fact that people absolutely 100% will take this content, of course, it's filling newspapers and magazines. She could have curated certain very special photo shoots, behind the scenes stuff, and got some of the magazines to in fact either invest in it or buy in it. But again, Meghan didn't, somehow they couldn't understand why she didn't want to do it. And more importantly, she let a lot of money slip through her fingers. Now again, another source points out that many of these people were interested in the brand originally, the first sort of incarnation of American Riviera. When it turned out to be a mess with no CEO, they rapidly lost interest. And the turning point possibly for this could be the fact that many people then came back and said, well, we would do something, but really we now need to include Prince Harry. We'd like to know his thoughts, say, on the wife's cookies or the, whatever she was doing at the time, the jam, because that's the selling point. Now, Meghan cannot stand this, truly 100%. She wants to be able to stand independently on her own. Now, Harry, for all of his, whatever you may think about him, he believes that this should also be the case, that why should he have to be the person next to her? We're two individual people who just happen to be married. But of course, people are not interested in people who are just married, to a former prince. You either play ball to sell the stuff or you don't. You see, the bottom line was all of this really started out way back on 40 times 40, when she put out that thing which was a total flop and is never mentioned now. The one thing that everybody picked up on was, you've guessed it, Prince Harry juggling some limes in the background. This was a throwaway last-minute addition by the person putting it together, say, look, they knew by having Harry in that this might just work. You get the picture. But of course, this really was the irritant to Meghan, because she felt that this took away from the absolute message that she was trying to transmit with herself and Melissa. And so consequently, that's why Harry on the recent as ever Meghan with Love TV show was, well, left almost to just like a small cameo. He had to come on and say, you worked very hard, I'm really proud of you. You see how this works. So for people to say that this is a marriage made in heaven, well, not really. For Meghan, it's a useful addition, and Harry is very much a much useful addition. But of course, she needs him, but doesn't want him in there, because this just highlights the fact that actually all she still remains is a former cable TV actress with a bit part in a soap that people, many now, have forgotten. But of course, for Meghan, in her main eyes, she has to be and will always remain the bigger star. Shades, of course, of Norma Desmond, Sunset Boulevard, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, as we conclude this particular episode, it's developing at the rate of knots as what's going on behind the scenes. Things are not going well at all, because clearly the wine's not sold out and you can push and push and push, but where do you go next? There is more to come, as I often say here on the show, but as for where it goes next, it's going to be absolutely fascinating. And all that will be revealed naturally on our next By Royal appointment. If you can, chums, if you could like, share, and of course, respectfully comment. Neil Shawn in the very heart of London.